You wake up one morning in your home in Chicago. The sun is coming through the window, and you smell the coffee brewing on the stove. You walk to the front door and pick up the newspaper from the porch. You unfold it and see the headline in bold black letters. It says the president has just made you a criminal. Not because you stole something, not because you hurt someone, but because you saved money. You have a small wooden box hidden under the floorboards in your bedroom. Inside that box are 20 gold coins. They are American Eagles. They are legal tender. You earned them by working 12-hour shifts at the factory. You did not trust the banks because you watched 3 of them collapse in your neighborhood. So you kept the gold at home, where it was safe. But now the paper says if you do not turn in those coins within 3 weeks, you will be fined $10,000. That is the equivalent of $200,000 in today's money. And if you refuse, you will go to prison for 10 years. 10 years in a federal penitentiary for the crime of owning a piece of metal. This is not fiction. This is not a story from Stalin's Russia or Mussolini's Italy. This happened in the United States of America. It happened in April of 1933. It happened under the signature of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is the story of Executive Order 6102. It is the story of the greatest wealth confiscation in American history. And it is the story of how the government used the fear of a crisis to seize the savings of its own people. But here is the part they do not teach you in school. The confiscation was not the crime. The confiscation was just the setup. The real theft came 9 months later, and it was done with a single proclamation that stole 40% of the purchasing power of every American who obeyed the law. Let's go back to the winter of 1933. America is on its knees. The Great Depression has shattered the economy like a hammer through glass. 1 in 4 men is unemployed. Factories sit silent with their smokestacks cold and dark. In the cities, bread lines stretch for blocks. People are sleeping in shanty towns made of cardboard and scrap metal. They call these towns Hoovervilles, named after the previous president who they blame for the disaster. But the real catastrophe is not happening in the streets. It is happening inside the banks. The entire American banking system is collapsing like a house of cards in a windstorm. Between 1930 and 1933, more than 9,000 banks have failed. When a bank fails, it does not just close its doors. It takes the life savings of every person who trusted it. There are no bailouts. There is no deposit insurance. If your bank goes under, your money is gone forever. Panic is spreading like a disease. When people hear that a bank might be in trouble, they rush to withdraw their money. But the banks do not have the cash. They have loaned it out to businesses and homeowners. So when everyone demands their money at once, the bank runs out of cash and collapses. This triggers more panic. More people rush to more banks. More banks collapse. It is a death spiral. And at the center of this spiral is gold. Under the law at the time, the United States dollar is backed by gold. If you have a $20 bill, you can walk into any bank and exchange it for a $20 gold coin. This system is called the gold standard. It is the foundation of the global economy. It means the government cannot just print money whenever it wants. Every dollar in circulation must be backed by a certain amount of gold sitting in the vault. But in 1933, this system is killing the economy. People have stopped trusting paper money. They want gold. They are pulling gold out of the banks and hiding it in their homes. Every time someone withdraws a gold coin, the bank's reserves shrink. And under the rules of the Federal Reserve, when reserves shrink, the bank must reduce its lending. So the more people hoard gold, the less money is available for business loans. The less money available for loans, the more businesses fail. The more businesses fail, the more people panic and hoard gold. It is a vicious cycle that is strangling the economy to death. On March 4th, 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt stands on the steps of the Capitol in the pouring rain. He raises his right hand and takes the oath of office. In his inaugural address, he speaks the famous line, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." The crowd cheers. The newspapers print his words in bold type. But behind the brave rhetoric, Roosevelt is terrified. He knows the banking system is hours away from total collapse. The gold reserves are almost depleted. If he does not act immediately, the United States will cease to function as a modern economy. His first move is to declare a national bank holiday. On March 6th, he signs an executive order closing every bank in the country. For an entire week, no one can access their money. The nation holds its breath. Roosevelt and his advisors gather in the White House. They look at the numbers. They realize they need to flood the economy with cash to restart business activity. But they cannot. The gold standard is handcuffing them. The law requires them to hold 40 cents of gold for every dollar they print. And they do not have enough gold because the people have hidden it all. Roosevelt faces a choice. He can let the system collapse and watch the country descend into chaos, or he can break the rules. He chooses to break the rules. He decides the gold in private hands does not belong to the people. He decides it belongs to the government. On April 5th, 1933, Roosevelt sits at his desk in the Oval Office. He picks up his pen and signs Executive Order 6102. The title is chilling, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates. It sounds like a wartime decree. In a way, it is. Roosevelt believes he is fighting a war against a depression, and in war, the government takes what it needs. The order is simple and brutal. It declares that all persons are required to deliver all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates to a Federal Reserve Bank by May 1st, 1933. There are small exceptions. You can keep $100 worth of gold for rare coins or personal use. You can use gold for dental fillings or jewelry manufacturing. But for ordinary Americans who saved gold as a hedge against inflation, it is a confiscation. The government offers to pay the official price of $20.67 per ounce. They will give you paper money in exchange for your gold. But here is the trap. The paper money is just a promise. And as millions of Americans are about to discover, it is a promise the government can rewrite whenever it wants. The reaction across the country is mixed. Many Americans trust Roosevelt. They believe he is trying to save the nation. They line up at the Federal Reserve banks with their coins and bars. They hand over their wedding gifts and their grandfather's savings. They walk away with paper dollars and a receipt. They believe they are doing their patriotic duty. But others see it for what it is. They see it as theft. Lawyers argue it violates the Fifth Amendment, which protects private property from government seizure without just compensation. But what is just compensation? Is $20 per ounce fair if the government is about to change the price? Some people refuse to comply. They do not protest publicly. They simply stay silent. They leave the gold under the floorboards or bury it in the backyard. They take the risk. The government knows many people will hide their gold, so they unleash the Treasury agents. They go through bank records looking for people who made large gold withdrawals in recent months. They knock on doors. They threaten prosecution. It is a time of fear. The government is treating honest savers like criminals. One man decides to fight back. His name is Frederick Barber Campbell. He is a wealthy lawyer in New York City. He has 27 bars of gold bullion stored at Chase National Bank. That is about 5,000 ounces. In today's money, that stash would be worth more than $10 million. When the executive order is signed, the bank contacts Campbell. They tell him they are required to turn his gold over to the Federal Reserve. Campbell knows the law. He marches into the bank and tells them no. He says the gold is his private property. He says the executive order is illegal. He demands the bank return his gold immediately. The bank refuses. So Campbell does something incredibly bold. He sues the bank, and he sues the United States government. The government strikes back with full force. They do not just fight his lawsuit. They indict him. On September 28, 1933, a federal grand jury indicts Frederick Campbell for failing to surrender his gold. He becomes the first person in American history to face criminal charges for owning money. The case becomes a media sensation. It is the individual versus the state, but the government is clever. They know if the case goes to a jury, Campbell might win. A jury of ordinary Americans might sympathize with him. So just before the trial begins, the government seizes the gold from the Chase vault. Then a judge rules that because the gold has already been taken, the criminal charges are moot. The indictment is dropped. Campbell loses his gold, but stays out of prison. The message is clear. You might not go to jail, but you will lose your wealth. The government will win, but the confiscation is not the end of the story. It is just the first act of a two-act heist. Roosevelt did not take the gold just to stop hoarding. He took it to execute a devaluation. Here's how the scheme works. Roosevelt wants to create inflation. He wants prices to rise. During the Depression, prices are collapsing. Farmers cannot sell their crops because they are too cheap. Workers are laid off because factories cannot sell their goods. Roosevelt believes if he can make the dollar worth less, prices will go up. And the way to make the dollar worth less is to raise the price of gold. But he cannot raise the price of gold while the people still own it. Think about it. If the government announced today that gold was going to double in value tomorrow, everyone who owns gold would become rich. Roosevelt does not want to enrich the hoarders. He wants the profit for the government. So he has to take the gold first. He waits. He waits until millions of ounces are collected. He waits until the gold is safely locked in the Federal Reserve vaults. And then in January of 1934, 9 months after the confiscation, he makes his move. Congress passes the Gold Reserve Act. It gives the president the power to set the price of gold. The very next day, Roosevelt signs a proclamation. He raises the price of gold from $20.67 to $35 per ounce. Do the math. That is a 69% increase. In the blink of an eye, the value of the gold sitting in government vaults jumps by billions of dollars. The government has made a massive paper profit. But what about the people who obeyed the law? The people who turned in their gold were paid $20 per ounce. Now that same gold is worth $35. they have been robbed. The government has effectively stolen 40% of their wealth. If you had kept your gold hidden, you would be 40% richer. But because you followed the order, because you trusted your government, you lost nearly half your purchasing power. It is a brilliant and ruthless financial maneuver. It allows the government to print billions of dollars of new paper money, backed by the inflated value of the gold. It floods the economy with cash. Economists still argue today about whether it worked. Some say it saved the economy. They say it broke the deflationary spiral and allowed recovery to begin. Others call it a crime. They say it destroyed the concept of private property in America. They say it taught the government that it could change the rules whenever it wanted. But the story gets darker. Not everyone surrendered without a fight. There were legal challenges. Thousands of contracts written before 1933 contained gold clauses. These were promises to repay debts in gold coin, not paper dollars. They were written into mortgage, bonds, and insurance policies. People included them specifically to protect themselves against inflation. When Roosevelt devalued the dollar, bondholders demanded payment in gold as their contracts specified. They went to court. They said a contract is a contract. You cannot erase it with an executive order. The cases went all the way to the Supreme Court. They were known as the Gold Clause cases. The fate of the New Deal hung in the balance. If the Supreme Court ruled against Roosevelt, the government would owe billions in back payments. The debt would be unpayable. Roosevelt was terrified. He even prepared a speech defying the Supreme Court if they ruled against him. He was ready to trigger a constitutional crisis. In February of 1935, the Supreme Court handed down its decision. It was a 5-4 vote. The court ruled in favor of the government. But the reasoning was twisted. The justices admitted what the government did was technically unconstitutional. They admitted it was a breach of contract. But they said the plaintiffs could not prove they had been damaged. They used a legal loophole to let the government off the hook. Justice McReynolds, one of the dissenters, was so furious he threw his papers on the floor. He shouted from the bench, "This is Nero at his worst. The Constitution is gone." He believed the America of property rights and limited government had died that day. So the government won. The gold was theirs. The profit was theirs. But now they faced a new problem. They had collected so much gold they did not know where to put it. The vaults in New York and Philadelphia were overflowing. Roosevelt looked at the world situation. He saw the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany. He worried that New York could be bombed or invaded. He wanted a fortress in the middle of the country, far from the coasts. He pointed to a military base in Kentucky called Fort Knox. In 1936, the government began construction on the most secure building on Earth. They built a fortress of granite and steel. They surrounded it with machine gun towers and minefields. They stationed an armored cavalry division nearby. Then the secret trains began. At night, armored trains moved across the country. They carried the melted-down savings of the American people. Millions of coins that once belonged to farmers and shopkeepers were melted into anonymous gold bars. They were stacked inside the vault at Fort Knox. The door to the vault weighs 22 tons. It is so heavy that no single person knows the full combination. It requires multiple staff members entering separate codes to open it. From the moment the gold entered Fort Knox in the late 1930s, a curtain of silence fell. Very few people have been inside. presidents have rarely visited. The last full audit of the gold was done in the 1950s. Since then, the government has refused to conduct a complete physical inventory. They say it is too expensive. Critics ask a simple question. If you have $500 billion in assets, would you not want to count it? In 1974, the rumors became so intense the government was forced to do a public relations stunt. A congresswoman named Mary Brooks claimed the gold was gone. She said the government had secretly sold it to finance the Vietnam War. To silence her, the Treasury invited a group of congressmen and 100 journalists to visit Fort Knox. On September 23, 1974, they opened the vault door. The cameras flashed. Reporters peered inside. They saw stacks of gold bars. One congressman picked up a bar to feel its weight. It looked real, but they only opened one compartment. Fort Knox has multiple compartments. They showed the press a tiny fraction of the total holdings. Was it a real audit or was it theater? We still do not know. But let's talk about the long-term consequences. The confiscation changed the relationship between Americans and their money forever. Before 1933, money was something you owned. It was a physical commodity with intrinsic value. After 1933, money became something the government allowed you to use. Its value depended entirely on trust in the state. And that trust was already broken. For 40 years, from 1934 to 1974, it was illegal for an American citizen to own monetary gold. Think about that. For 4 decades, while America preached freedom and capitalism against the Soviet Union, it was a crime for a free American to buy a gold bar. If you wanted to protect your wealth from inflation, you had to buy real estate or stocks.